So here we have some baseboard in my kitchen, and you see here, if you look carefully, this piece of baseboard has had some moisture damage, and it's actually swollen. Looks like this piece is damaged too. I'm not sure what's going on here, but we're going to take this apart and see what's going on. I confirmed I don't have any water leaks in the house. I watched the electric meter. The meter was rock solid for half an hour, so I don't know if there's something maybe in the cabinet that's leaking. I don't see any signs of water in there. But the first step is to take the trim off and see what we see. So for that, we're going to need a 5-in-1 and a razor knife. Now, had this been wood baseboard, we probably wouldn't be having this problem because wood does not swell the same way that this stuff does, as medium density fiberboard when it gets wet. So I got my 5-in-1. You can pick these up at home centers, and I got my razor knife. I'm just going to use the razor knife to cut the caulk so that we don't tear the paint when we try to pry this off. And I use the term pry loosely because I think it's just going to fall off. You can see the moisture right there. So where's it coming from? It's definitely wet. I was right. If you look here, there's a puddle of water in here. Where is this water coming from? Okay then. I'm going to do the same thing to take this piece of baseboard off. Also completely full of water. Where is it coming from? Okay, problem solved. I figured out what it was. So notice where that is. So we have some cabinetry, and right here is the fridge. Here is the water line for the fridge. I don't know if you can tell, but that same recess behind the fridge has water in it too. Where is it coming from? The solenoid valve for the fridge is dripping once every 8 seconds. Lovely. I guess this is going to be 2 repairs in this video. Now, when I first noticed this issue, my first instinct was slab leak. I have a leak under my concrete slab. So the first thing I did was I went out to the water meter and I watched it for about half an hour, and it didn't move, not even 1/100th of a gallon. And by my math, this should have been moving. So I guess this water meter is not as accurate as it is advertised to be, because one drop. I did the math yesterday. I think if the number on the meter had gone up at all in the 30 minutes that I was measuring it, it would have been like 1/10 of a drop, and a drop every 8 seconds is clearly a lot more than that. So don't always trust your water meter. Man, what a mess. A couple hours later, I got a parts order going with Amazon. I'll give you links to all this stuff that I order in this video. So I've decided to replace this copper line, at least the piece that comes out of the, maybe I'll leave a little bit sticking out of the wall, but I'm going to replace a lot of it. I'm going to put a shutoff valve at the wall, a ball valve. I'm going to replace this rigid copper line with some braided stainless steel. I'll explain why in a second. And I've ordered a new solenoid down here. The reason why I've decided to order a braided stainless steel line is because I think that the rigidity of this copper, you can see that as I move this copper, the valve is flexing. The valve actually has a crack, very small right in there, that's only exacerbated when the copper is in a certain position. So I think that might be part of the problem. I think just over the last 10 years or so, since this fridge was installed, just the stress that this rigid copper line is putting on that solenoid valve has caused that crack. So we're going to replace the whole shooting match. The solenoid valve, this copper pipe, like I said, we're going to braided stainless steel, which is going to be more flexible, and we're doing a ball valve at the wall. So yeah, this is a bit more intense than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be, hey, you know what? My daughter was going to tell me she spilled something on the floor next to the trim. Not so. So these parts should be here tomorrow, so let's pick it up when they arrive. Amazon came through, and as promised, this was on my doorstep when I woke up this morning. This is the new valve. Came in a box, obviously, with this instruction sheet for diagnosing the valve. Kind of a moot point. If you already bought the valve, why diagnose if it's bad, right? One thing I noticed off the bat, just eyeballing it, I don't have the two side by side, notice that the inlet valve here is at an angle on this valve. So this must be an updated part. Maybe they realized there was a problem with this valve and they put this whole solenoid in an angle, like you see. So that's nice to see. Hopefully this solves the problem and this piece doesn't crack anymore. So let's shut the power off to the fridge and swap this thing out. I'd like to correct something I said before. I said that this fridge is made by Whirlpool. At least I'm pretty sure I did. It's made by Electrolux. I, for some reason, thought they were the same company, but I was mistaken. So I got the power cut off to the fridge. I got the water turned off. I have a ball valve in the garage that shuts the water off to this line. So I'm just going to unscrew the valve. There's two nuts that secure to the frame over here. You guys probably can't see them, but they're pretty self-explanatory. There's one. Make sure you drop it on the ground. Actually, you know what? Let's leave that bottom one in there for a moment. Let's crack this water line loose. Since this valve is busted, I don't care too much about damaging it. I let that bottom screw in just for something to hold the valve. Keep it from flopping around in the breeze. So now the valve is loose, just like that. So now make note of where the electrical connections are. So you have green back there, yellow, and brown. I think that's all of them. Also take note of where the water hoses go to. So that brownish looking hose goes into the inlet here. The yellowish looking hose goes into the solenoid with the yellow wire. And this greenish looking hose goes in the solenoid with the green wire. Seems pretty hard to mess that one up, right? And the clear one obviously goes in the back. So now to remove these hoses, normally you just depress the collar on the hose and the hose should pop right out. Like that. Should be the operative word. Two. Oh, still got a little bit of water pressure there. There we go. Here you can see the design change a bit more clearly. So old valve on the bottom, new valve on the top. Look at the angle of this solenoid right here. So it's probably a known issue they corrected. Let's take these electrical connectors off. Don't know off the top of my head if polarity matters, but I would assume that it does. So just transfer it over, like so. If any of you guys know for sure if polarity matters, feel free to share. So we got our lines, our electrical lines hooked back up. And we got our old valve is completely free. Hook back our water hoses, green to green. Just push it in securely. Yellow to yellow. clear in the back. Brown in the front. You can give it a quick test, right? So I'm gonna let you guys be the first to see if this thing leaks everywhere. Wouldn't surprise me, I hate compression fittings. But that's getting replaced anyway. You looking good? I don't see any signs of leaks. Let's plug the fridge back in and give her a test. Watch those water lines. Back in. I'm gonna use the water dispenser and see what happens. Do you guys see any leaks? Seems good to me. Now you'll notice that this area is generally pretty clean, and you want to keep it that way, especially this area here. This is where the condenser coil is on the fridge. If this gets all caked up with hair and dust and whatnot, the fridge will not cool effectively. This coil's job is to turn the superheated refrigerant vapor coming out of the compressor and condense it back into a liquid so it can phase change in the evaporator coil and cool all your food. If this doesn't cool that superheated refrigerant down to a liquid and condense it, then you won't have a cooling effect, or you'll have a very minimal cooling effect. So they do make special brushes that you can use to clean this. I'll see if I can find one online and give you guys a link in the description. It's nothing super fancy. You don't need to buy this brush. I'm sure you can figure something out. A regular bottle brush will probably work. Not all fridges have this coil back here accessible though. Sometimes it's built into the cabinet, sometimes it's way underneath on the bottom, so sometimes you do need a special brush to get to it. But generally you want to keep this area clean. I clean it maybe once a year or so. I have 2 dogs. Make sure this fan here is turning. That's your condenser fan. If that's not turning, then yeah, you're gonna have a similar problem. You also don't want to run the fridge for too long with this cover off, because this cover actually does serve a purpose. What does it do? It directs the airflow. So it makes sure the air reaches the compressor, because that condenser fan cools the compressor as well. And it also makes sure that air is pulled across the whole condenser coil. So if this thing's missing, air might be hitting, you know, over here instead of getting sucked all the way over. I mentioned having a shutoff in the garage for the ice maker and the water dispenser in the fridge. I just wanted to show you how I typically do these. So in a lot of houses you'll see what's called a line piercing valve, also known as a saddle valve, where it just pokes a little hole in the water pipe, and over time that clogs up with sediment, and you can't really ever shut those off after a couple of years. So what I did here when I installed this water heater, I put a T on the cold side, and you see that vertical pipe right in front of you, and you see that 1/2-inch ball valve with the vertical handle. And that line, that plastic line coming off to the right, goes to the fridge to my right, an inch away from the camera. And that line come out the top, it's copper, goes to the fridge we were just working on. So that's how I typically like to do these. This is a foolproof setup, never leaks, can shut it down very reliably. So I mentioned I pulled the baseboard off this opposite wall because it was bulging and degraded along here too. Now this trim was put on about 10 years ago by yours truly, and fortunately Lowe's doesn't carry it anymore. This is the closest thing they do have. So I bought 4 sticks of this. You know, it's just one of those post-pandemic modifications. It's a similar profile, not identical, but it's close enough, but it's thinner. So I used to be able to get these things in pro packs, you know, packs of 6 for I think 100, 120 bucks all day long. Packs of 6. These are about 30 bucks a piece. So yeah. Anyway, let's get the paint and we'll start. Actually, I'm going to prime the back of them first, just to give them a little bit more of a fighting chance against any moisture they might ever see. Hopefully none. Once that is dry, then we'll paint. Surprising number of people have never seen one of these things. What is it? It can do 2 things. It can open a beer bottle. It can also open a paint can. Observe. Don't use a screwdriver. So that's its first function. Now where's my beer? Beer of the day is Corona. Not a sponsor, unfortunately. No relation to coronavirus. That's the second use. Got our primer on the bottom of the board. Now this one, I made a mistake. I thought I was priming the bottom, but I was priming the top, so that whole thing ended up getting primer. If you were watching carefully, you would have seen my mistake. I'm sure you guys are watching really carefully. Let's let the paint dry. I'm about to start making cuts. I got 2 coats of paint on all the pieces of trim. So what I'm cutting right now is I'm going to cut the piece for that long wall. Those pieces of trim come in 12-foot sections, but this wall is longer than 12 feet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scarf, that's what they call it, scarf 2 pieces together. So I already cut the 45 for this corner here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a short piece to go about here. I'm going to do another 45 right there. I already got the saw set on a 45-degree angle. If you guys are going to be doing any amount of trim or crown molding work, I highly recommend getting one of these saws. I'll leave a link in the description. It's not cheap, but it'll pay for itself the first time you use it if you have a lot of work to do. So again, I already cut that end down there at a 45. I'm going to do a 45 about 50 inches in from here. Doesn't be exact, get it approximate. I just want to put it where I showed you so that the joint is not in the middle of a doorway, so that someone doesn't see it as soon as they walk out of the door. So it's between 2 rooms. So there, we've got our 45 on both ends. So something like that. And the piece that we cut to go here will have a matching 45 on one end, and then we can just hopefully blend that joint together and make it disappear. So before we shoot this piece of trim up, we're gonna put a piece on right here. So that's 4.5 inches wide, so I'm gonna cut that with a chop saw. So we got our piece cut. Taking things about as far as I can take them without actually attaching some of this trim to the wall, just so things stay in a consistent position so I could take some measurements. So next step is to get our trim gun. I use a Boss Stitch crown stapler, and we'll just kind of tack the trim in place so we can finish measuring and cutting things. This is the crown stapler I like to use. It is an 18 gauge SX. I'll see if I can find a model number in here for you. I think it's right there. SX 1838 maybe? I'll look it up. I'll leave a link in the description. This is my go-to gun. I love this thing. So I'm going to get my portable air tank. We'll take that inside and we'll tack some of this trim in place. Got to load the gun up. I like to use 1.5 inch staples. You don't have to, but That's just what I use. And we'll hook up our portable air tank. This tank makes it a lot easier if you don't have an air compressor at a location where you're going to be doing the stapling. So this will give you quite a few shots. I got this tank at Lowe's, as you can tell, Cobalt. I think it was about 60, 70 bucks. Doesn't have to be this one, but just what works for me. I've got these pieces in the corner just kind of sitting in place. Now it's time to tack them in. Jeez, sorry guys. Still getting used to this camera. So what I typically do is I'll hold it in place, get things how I like them, and then I'll just pin it with the stapler. I'm going to pin this piece first. So just one for now until I make sure I'm happy with it, because it's easy to pull a lot easier to pull one staple out than it is 10. So 1, 2, 3. Here we go. I'm going to pin one on this piece over here. Okay. Now we'll tackle this longer piece here. Making sure the corner over here is nice and tight, and we'll shoot a staple on it. Now there's a reason why I put one almost in the center there, because no floor is perfectly flat. You see here, there's a gap under the trim there. There's a gap under the trim over here too. So I kind of want to split the difference. Obviously, where the staple is a high point, we're not going to bend that trim too easily. So putting the staple in the center allows you to kind of rock it back and forth and find out what that middle point is. So I don't want a half-inch gap between the trim and the floor right there. Small gap we can fill with caulk. So there's our scarf joint that we cut. Whoops. Guess I'll hope if I put the mic on. Oh, I did. So let's make this joint disappear. Something like that. You barely see it, barely feel it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it disappear as much as I can. I'm going to put a temporary staple in there. Probably about like that. Put a staple in here this is just temporary. We're going to go down to the other end and mark the length. And now we'll mark where the wall and the trim meet. So right about there. We'll cut that off. Pull our temporary staple out. And cut on your mark. Though I haven't been showing it, as I've been cutting pieces, I've been painting the joints right here. So this is a 45-degree cut. I've been painting them. That has two advantages. One, if any moisture gets into that joint somehow, that'll help it prevent it. Well, help prevent it from getting soaked up into the wood. And two, it'll help hide the joint a little bit, because rather than having a dark MDF color like that, you have white on white. So it helps the joint disappear a little bit. It takes a lot of extra time, but I think it's worth it. So here's that piece we were just working on. Slide it into position. We're going to tack it in place with that staple, except this one's not temporary. Take your time and position the piece, because this is going to dictate how it looks. Okay. We'll go down to the other end now. This is kind of frustrating. You guys can see that gap between the baseboard and the tile. That's thanks to Lowe's. I don't know, changing the supplier or whatnot on their tile. I'll have to find something to fill that with. That's very disappointing. Thumbs down, Lowe's. Make a mistake along the way and you cut a piece a little too long, as I did here. This piece is just a tad too long. Don't sweat it. You can fill the gaps with caulk. As long as it's not like, you know, 1/8 of an inch wide or something. It'll disappear. I'm pulling this piece off, and I cut it down a little bit because I just wasn't happy with the joint over on this corner over here. So I shaved a little bit off of it. And I also, if you notice, I closed this gap here, and how I did that, instead of shooting a staple down here, I shot a staple up high. So it kind of pulled it up top rather than down below. So hopefully we can keep that gap small and we can fill that even better with caulk. Last piece, I had to notch it to get it around the cabinet right here. So I just cut a notch out and it slides right in. I'm going to call it a day. We have all the baseboards shot in. Still have to fill the staple holes and caulk it in. But this was the time-consuming part. Everything else is pretty easy after this. Before we finish the base, though, I think we're going to do the water line so I can push the fridge back in. Here's that ball valve I think I mentioned earlier in the video. So this is going to get plumbed into that copper line. I'm going to cut it cut the copper line down closer to the wall, install this valve, and this is going to be the new line going to the fridge. And this is, you know, obviously a lot more flexible. So hopefully this will be a better longer term solution. I mean, normally I would like to stick with copper, but I mean, I don't want this to happen again. So we'll pick it up probably tomorrow or the next day, and we'll do the plumbing. Use my trusting tubing cutter to cut that 1/4 inch copper line.
You'll leave plenty of room for do-overs. I'm not a big fan of compression fittings. Helps to go slow with this.
There we go. Now you want to deburr the inside of the copper line. I'm just using a little file. Okay. I'm going to take that ferrule that comes with the compression fitting, shove it down in the pipe. Actually, don't forget to put fitting on the pipe. So the order that you're going for is the nut, the compression fitting, and then that brass thing. So just like that. And then just simply install your valve, put a wrench on one side to hold it. Really don't like compression fittings, but it is what it is, right? That ball valve open in the garage. You guys let me know if you see any water dripping. You guys see any leaks? Seems okay. Our new hose. I'll hook it up here. I'm going to run it to the sink and just run a couple gallons through this, because who knows? I'm sure I introduced some copper into the pipe when I was filing. Additionally, we don't know where any of this stuff was made, and we could take some guesses. We don't know the cleanliness of those facilities, so this is drinking water. We're going to be careful. Might leak a little bit here. I didn't tighten that. She's coming through pretty quickly at that. 4 or 5 gallons through that hose into the sink. I'm just going to let this sit with the water pressure on, nothing running through the hose for a couple minutes, just to make sure there are actually no leaks. 2 hours, I got sidetracked with some other stuff, and everything appears to be bone dry. That's good, right? All right, I think I'm going to add a brace or a bracket of some kind just to kind of secure this so it's not flopping around in the breeze. Use one of those toggler snap screws. There we go. Nice and secure. As you can see, I probably ordered enough ice maker hose to reach one of the neighbors' houses, so I ordered a shorter hose. I think that one's 15 feet. Here's a 6-footer. The only thing I'm not thrilled about with this 6-footer is it looks like the ID, I don't know if you can tell, it's kind of restricted, but we'll give it a shot. Making a mess is always fun. Before we send water from this brand new hose into the fridge, let's send it into this pot. I think that'll work. Seems to have good flow. Run a gallon or two through that. Turn the water on. As you can see, that line is much shorter. So from the wall, like that, 6 feet down to the ice maker. I did check flow to the water dispenser. It doesn't seem any different than the larger diameter hose, so I was probably worried about pretty much nothing. So I think the plumbing side of this job is just about done. I don't think there's anything else I need to do here. So let's push the fridge back in, and I guess the rest of the video will be about finishing the trim, which is kind of what we started with. Bought this fridge, another 10-year lease on life. A couple of days have passed. I just decided to pull the fridge out just to make sure everything is still dry. And it does appear to be. See, no signs of moisture there. No signs of moisture on the floor. We're back in that little crevice. I also see no signs of moisture or swelling on the baseboard we installed. I think I'm going to wait a little while before caulking it in, especially the bottom, just in case there is any residual moisture there that didn't dry out organically. I caulk in the top. It's been about a week. I think anything that hasn't dried is probably going to be there forever. Anyway, this is the caulk I generally use on trim, and I want to emphasize trim only. This caulk is not very good. Do not use it in the kitchen. Do not use it around water. Do not use it outside, regardless of what it says on the container. It's inexpensive. It's great for baseboard, but not much else. And running a bead of caulk that'll make you cry is pretty easy. Just go like that, across the top. Take your finger and a little wet rag and just smooth it out. This caulk was already open, so the tip is probably a little bit bigger than it should be for this job, but we'll make it work. There you go. You can also use the caulk to fill up that scarf joint if there's any gaps. You can see mine has a little bit of a gap. Some folks will tell you to glue it together, and you can do that. I've done both. Both will work. It's whatever you prefer and what works best for you. So let's shoot some caulk over there, and then after that we'll paint it, and this should disappear. It might open up as the weather changes or the moisture in the house changes, but there's not much you can do about that. The idea is to minimize it, all right? It's not going to disappear entirely. You just don't want it to stand out like a sore thumb when you walk down the hallway. Something like that. Take a damn cloth and just kind of smooth it out a little bit. Don't go nuts. There. Let that dry. You can also use that same technique to fill any gaps in outside corners. Some guys will tell you to take a pencil or a pen and just kind of roll over that joint to bring it back onto itself. I don't generally use that technique. Some people like it. It's personal preference. You can make the joint disappear either way. Now, the last step in all this is to fill the nail holes. I like to use this product. It's called Fast and Final. I think you can pick it up at Lowe's and Home Depot. You'll probably get it online too. I'll see if it's there and leave you a link in the description. But it's pretty easy to work with. It's almost like a paste. You put a little dab on your finger, fill the holes, and then you can just run over it with a little bit of paint, and then you're good to go. Now you can also caulk the bottom. I'm not going to show you that because it's pretty much the same as caulk at the top, but That's also personal preference. Some people like to do that and make the baseboard look seamless. Some people don't mind that gap. I'll probably end up caulking it, but again, I'm going to let it sit for a while just to let it air out. I don't want there to be any moisture under there that's going to get sealed in. So anyway, hope you guys thought this video was helpful. You saw me end-to-end troubleshoot an apparent problem. Obviously water damage on baseboard. We found the root cause, we fixed the root cause, we repaired the damage, and we're good to go. If you like this video, please subscribe, stay safe, and thanks for watching, everybody. Enjoyed talking to you.